And he won.
Yeah, exactly. Listen. It says right there, there are 7 quarterbacks that have 2 Super Bowl wins and an MVP. Here's who they are. And so Patrick, Tom, Peyton, Elway, Montana, Bruce Guy, Terry Bradshaw, and Bart Starr. So I think Stafford would join that list. What's most notable, I think, is who's not on it. So Drew Brees is not on that list. Drew Brees, doesn't have an MVP or multiple Super Bowls. Aaron Rodgers is not on that list. Brett Favre is not on that list. I'm not going to name every quarterback, but some of the quarterbacks that I think everyone looks at as a tier or 2 above Stafford in wherever Stafford is historically. And I think that would have to change. I think that, and Brew, you've made the point, and Coach Mangini makes the point about most all-time great quarterbacks elevate franchises. Yep. And the Lions, clearly as a franchise, are elevatable because once he left, with the right coach and the right everything, they elevated. And you've made the point about he had Calvin Johnson. It's not like they never had good players.
Right.
With all that said, if the story on Stafford is he got out of Detroit, and in the 6 years he was not in Detroit, he won 2 Super Bowls, made another conference championship game, won a league MVP, I think people will say he was always this level of player. And I think like Big Ben, Drew Brees, whatever room of the Hall of Fame they're in, Brett Favre maybe, he enters that same room because of the accolades.
Okay, so this is, to be honest, a pretty absurd discussion from my perspective. And we were already having this exact same conversation heading into the postseason last year, talking about the Rams and Matthew Stafford, and what capturing a Super Bowl title would do for his place in history. My take back then was that it changes absolutely nothing. Because he's already cemented as an all-time great quarterback, regardless of whether he ever gets a ring or not. And the fact that they didn't win the championship last season only reinforces that point, because he remains precisely the same caliber of player. He was not the reason Los Angeles lost the Super Bowl. He wasn't the reason they failed to win it. No rational person could look at last year's performance and conclude that Matthew Stafford was at fault for the Rams not coming out on top, or that he didn't elevate his game enough. Oh, if only he had raised his level even further, then they would have taken the title. Please. Patrick Mahomes would have won the Super Bowl with that Rams roster? No. Absolutely not. So it's ridiculous to say things like, oh, if he adds another championship, then he belongs to this weirdly specific club, 2 Super Bowls and an MVP. And it's like, okay, sure, whatever. Drew Brees easily could have won an MVP in several different seasons, but he didn't, because that award is just a fabricated vote conducted by the media. Honestly, I don't think Stafford deserved the MVP this past year. He probably could have won it a few years earlier, sure, but I don't believe he was truly the MVP last season. Sorry, on one hand, I'm defending Matthew Stafford, but on the other hand, I also have to acknowledge the counter-argument. He had an incredibly talented, loaded roster around him. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, an elite offensive line, a dominant rushing attack, and so on. There's a case to be made that other quarterbacks had to carry their teams more. But again, just as I defended Stafford by saying we don't blame him for the loss or for failing to win the Super Bowl, this is exactly why the conversation gets so twisted. It becomes completely distorted. And if we want to keep playing this game, consider this: Stafford didn't even win the MVP of the Super Bowl that he actually won. Right? So it just doesn't add up. And furthermore, if you can't recognize that Detroit clearly held Matthew Stafford back, wow. Yes, he had Calvin Johnson, who was obviously a monster receiver. I'm not denying that. And sure, the Lions have become respectable since he left, and people say, see? They built an entire roster and got an elite coach in Ben Johnson. But things changed drastically when Stafford departed Detroit. That's just the reality. These are franchise-level achievements. That's why I like using Stafford as an example in both directions. I point out that he didn't win in Detroit. Then, as soon as he joined Sean McVay and the Rams, he suddenly started making the playoffs and winning. That doesn't mean Stafford isn't a huge part of that success, but it's a two-way street. It's always a two-way street, yet we constantly want to pick and choose one direction depending on the quarterback we're discussing. It's a one-way street for Jalen Hurts in one direction. It's a one-way street in the opposite direction for Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. It's a one-way street for Josh Allen. It was a one-way street for Lamar Jackson. No, 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 no. That's why I kept referencing Matthew Stafford as this comparison all last season. People kept saying, you hate Matthew Stafford, when in reality, you've got it completely backwards. I love Matthew Stafford. I just made my quarterback rankings video, or whatever Colin did, and I said, right now, if it's one game to rule them all, ignoring back injuries, ignoring the future, ignoring contract money, and you're in the Super Bowl, who do you want as your quarterback this very moment? For me, the quarterbacks I can say with absolute certainty, 100% trust and faith, are Josh Allen and Matthew Stafford. I've said this a million times, if Stafford had been with McVay his entire career with the Rams, he could be in the GOAT conversation. The GOAT conversation is incredibly fragile, because I made a similar comment about Joe Burrow. So it really comes down to where you land, what situation you're in, who your coach is. Stafford at the tail end of his career, and it's been a long journey, don't get me wrong, he didn't get to have Ian McVay when he was 25 or 26 years old. That wasn't his story. He didn't get to be developed by someone like McVay, Andy Reid, or similar coaches. I mean, the Lions had accomplished nothing for decades. And we can say, oh, he elevated them. Okay. But again, the Kansas City Chiefs with Alex Smith were making the playoffs every single year, winning the division, earning top seeds, etc. Elevating that to Super Bowl wins is much easier than elevating a franchise that's doing absolutely nothing, literally nothing. So for me, this isn't really about Stafford. It's more about the Rams. I view it much more through a franchise lens. I have a franchise-driven outlook rather than a quarterback-driven outlook. And that's why I went on. It's actually kind of funny because I've always known this, but I have the perfect example. It was about the Rams. I said, the Rams have the best chance to win the Super Bowl. They've gone all in on this and that. And then I said, listen, if you don't win the Super Bowl this year, assuming everyone stays healthy, it would be a pretty epic failure. Because you've done absolutely everything. You've gone all in, positively and completely. You have an utterly stacked roster, an amazing coaching staff, an amazing quarterback, etc., right? It would just be a failure. Not a failure in the sense of oh my god, the Rams are a disaster, but a failure in the sense of, yeah, this is the ultimate scenario, if you don't win a Super Bowl now, then what are we even do? ING here? Because you've done everything possible. And that's exactly what they did in 2021. They won the Super Bowl, and it was awesome. And it was like, yeah, see, that's what you have to do, man. Go all in. Take those swings. And I don't look at it through the lens of, if they don't win a Super Bowl, what does that say about Stafford? What does it say about Stafford that he's only won one Super Bowl since arriving with Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams? It says nothing. Absolutely nothing. Especially because at this stage of Matthew Stafford's career, given its length, it's a little different. It's a lot different, because he's not 28 years old. The guy has like 9 kids and a bad back. And when he lets his gray beard grow out, you know he's no spring chicken. Things have changed. But he's still obviously elite, and he's one of the most gifted quarterbacks of all time, whether he ends up winning another Super Bowl or not. That's why last year is such a perfect representation of that. He was elite. He was awesome. No doubt about it. And they didn't win the Super Bowl. He is still the exact same quarterback. It's one thing if he had laid an egg in that NFC Championship game. It's one thing if he had turned the ball over 3 times and everyone said, oh boy. And again, that's why I think it's always important to have honest, full 360-degree conversations. Because I said, hey, he did not play a great game against the Panthers. He got bailed out by Puka Nacua popping that interception. That's my real take. And he wasn't perfect against the Bears, but they won those games. Then he was awesome. We could say, oh, he wasn't good enough on 3rd down or something. But he was awesome against the Seattle Seahawks. He was not the reason they lost. I'm sure you can point to a throw that didn't work out, or a failed conversion on 3rd down, but the bottom line is he was awesome. You just cannot look at him and say he's why they lost. But also, in earlier games, I can't necessarily say he's the reason they won either. So again, it's just the benefit of having the full, honest discussion no matter what. And that's why, for me, Stafford is probably such a perfect representation of the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great. You win, you don't win. And he's clearly an elite quarterback, clearly special. I actually find it surprising. I didn't realize this early on when I started making more and more videos. I just thought it was common knowledge how elite Stafford is, how special of a quarterback he is, and that everyone understood that. Yeah, I thought, Detroit. But then I started watching more clips and making clips, and people were ragging on Nick Wright for having Stafford up on his mountain, or whatever. This was around 2023 or 2024, whatever year it was. And I just thought, wait a second, doesn't everyone just understand that Stafford is elite? Are people actually questioning that? I honestly don't understand. It's hard for me to comprehend. And Stafford is clearly bona fide elite. He is a special quarterback. I don't even see how it could be debated against. Which is why, again, I use him as a reference point. See, even he needs help. Because Patrick Mahomes is still very controversial. If you bring up Mahomes and talk about Andy Reid or anyone else, people have a meltdown. But I'm like, okay, Stafford is such a good representation of this. He wasn't winning playoff games in Detroit. And look, when Puka wasn't there, he threw a lot of interceptions. I use him as that example. When Puka went down in 2024 or whatever it was, Stafford had a losing record and threw more interceptions than touchdowns. Does that mean we should now conclude that Stafford is actually not great? No. It just shows you the complexity of football. It shows you the complexity of the sport. Stafford had an elite running game last year, the most successful run game in the NFL. And when that run game wasn't working, the passing game struggled. That's what we saw in the second half against the Seattle Seahawks. And yeah, even for Sean McVay, even with Puka Nacua, even with Cooper Kupp, even with Stafford, even with an elite offensive line, your offense can really struggle at times depending on the specific situation causing it. And I love going back to that Stafford, Los Angeles Rams example. But again, for me, the bigger conversation is about the Rams. I often look at things over the last 5 years, the last 10 years. And what I've been doing recently is focusing on what feels like the start of this era, 2017, right? The moment Patrick Mahomes was drafted. That feels like the current era of the NFL. So roughly the last 10 years or so. And when I look at it, I see that the Eagles won 2 Super Bowls and went to 3. The Rams went to 2, I think technically the other one was with Jared Goff, because that was 2018, I believe, when Goff went to the Super Bowl. I forget the exact timeline. But they only won the one. Obviously Mahomes has won multiple Super Bowls and all that. And more recently, the Seahawks. So I look at it more as a chunk, as a franchise. You made that move, you have Sean McVay, you built these awesome rosters combining Goff and Stafford. And I see it as successful, getting Stafford, winning a Super Bowl, being as competitive as you are. But at the end of the day, as a franchise, I would expect at least 2. You would hope for 2. 3 Super Bowls is like gravy, right? That's the cherry on top. But 2 is solid. I made similar comments about the Eagles and Jalen Hurts. They built this amazing team, and obviously things are changing a little bit with A.J. Brown, but you get Saquon, you've got Jalen, you've got this elite offensive line, and so on. I think realistic expectations are key. If you're demanding more than 2, you're getting greedy, right? Don't get me wrong, you want to win 3, 4, 5, 6. But 2, to me, is a realistic expectation if you trust your franchise. They build teams, you have the quarterback, etc. Anything more than that, you're essentially demanding that your team be historically amazing. How can you demand that? You can't demand them to be historically special. That's not fair expectations. But 2. Okay, I can see how 2 makes sense. So that's how I look at it for the Rams. If they don't win another one, it's more about, man, you weren't able to bring it together. I don't put that on the shoulders of Stafford's legacy. That's the way I personally see it. But those are just my thoughts. I would absolutely love to hear yours. What do you all think about Matthew Stafford? What would a Super Bowl win mean for his legacy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, whether you agree with me or disagree. Either way, let's get into some discussions. Let's get into some debates. But ultimately, let's just have some fun. Please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I would absolutely love to see you be part of it. I want to build something that we all generally feel connected to, something we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing that. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help with visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much.